Hello, I'm Dr. John Vanderslice, and leading you through another video about the essentials of fiction writing. And this subject today is a very important one of generating fictional material, which, as you can imagine, kind of is behind a lot of what we do as fiction writers. We got to have something to start with. Getting started is often maybe the biggest challenge for people. It's one thing, you need to make time, but after you make time, actually commit and get underway and start writing. For some people, that's a matter of deciding what subject to write about. Like, some people have lots of ideas. They have no issue with the ideas. It's more like just deciding that it's time to start with that idea. But some people have a little more trouble. Do I write about this? Do I write about that? So I thought today I would suggest some subjects that, to me, feel like natural subjects in which one could find many different stories. I mean, you could find stories anywhere in the world, anywhere in your life, probably, anywhere in your imaginary life. But there are some places in particular that I think are very rich for fictional material. So let's look at some of them. The first, I list first because I think often people don't think of that, and that is jobs. I once read a wonderful essay by a writer named Brett Locke, and what Locke's contention was, and as I read, I said he's right, and that is that while jobs are basically a part of everyone's life, almost everyone works a job. There's very, very few people in life who just don't need to work. And we devote 8, 9, 10, even more hours a day to them. Yet in terms of fiction, a lot of fiction happens outside of our work lives. In the sense the stories happen, the character comes home, and then there's a drama. There's something going on with his family or a neighbor or his spouse, her spouse, or children. But why not see if work itself is a place where you can find dramatic, engaging plots and stories? Because often there are. If you think about it, I worked a job many, many years ago writing letters for an insurance company, dictating them actually, which I was trained to do. Doesn't sound like a fascinating job, but it was okay. But I once wrote a story inspired by that job about someone who gets a letter they don't appreciate and comes to the office confronting the person who wrote the letter. And wow, there was a lot of interesting tension there, because I had worked that job and I knew what some of these letters said, and I realized for someone receiving it on the other end might react with not a lot of pleasure sometimes. And I was curious about it. So I decided, well, let's use that situation for a story. What would happen if someone actually came to my office to talk to me about the letter I wrote? Now, the character was not me, of course. But it was a very, very interesting and satisfying story to write. And I still remember it fondly because it was so different from the other stories I was writing then, because I made the work basically the sole focus of the drama of the story. So think about jobs you've had, jobs your friends have. What stories are there that are embedded in the work life, or could be embedded in the work life? The other big category, which I suppose most people would think about, which is family. Families have stories. Your family has stories, my family has stories. Our extended families are rich with stories. It kind of goes without saying, if you need a story to write fiction about, think if there's some inspiration you can draw. Now, I would not say tell secrets about your brother or your sister or your uncle or your cousin. I would not say that. But consider if you can draw some inspiration for a genuinely fictional piece from the histories around, and you know those histories. You're going to be familiar, or you might need to research them. You might need to ask some questions. You might need to think about them harder. My gosh, are there a lot of stories embedded in our family lives? Another category to turn to are your actual immediate physical surroundings. I sometimes, if I'm on a streak of writing lots of stories, and I want to sit down and write a story today, and I haven't really committed to one particular idea, I think, well, where am I? Where am I writing this? How about I start here and then see what happens? And that often, if you just get started, if you just begin with some fictional premise, she was at her desk and someone knocked at the door. If you just get started and see what comes, you'll eventually get to a story. You'll get to the story you actually feel like you were meant to write. But you have to start somewhere. So sometimes just your immediate physical surroundings. There's a very famous Japanese novelist named Haruki Murakami. And I read a piece about him one time, and the author said Murakami was visiting and teaching in America for a period. And this person wanted to interview Murakami. And they were having lunch out, and the person said, what do I do when I'm stuck? Everybody gets stuck as a writer. What do you do? And Murakami, he was a very practical person, just thought about it for a second. He said, well, just stick into the story what's right in front of you. Like they were having hamburger lunch. He said, stick the hamburger in the story. Just go from there. So that is always a way just to get started. Just make something happen in your story using your immediate surroundings. Another great inspiration for stories is images. Pictures. A picture can be an historical picture. It can be a picture from today's newspaper. Some kind of physical picture. And look at it. What is there? Who is there? What's being suggested to you? I once did an exercise with a class where I cut pictures out of different magazines. And I would hand just randomly pictures to classes, and sometimes I would give them more than one. And I said, combine these pictures into a story. Just tell me a story that forces you to make use of the character or the background, anything about the picture at all. And they ran with it. Those students had never a problem coming up with stories. And the stories would be, we were just getting started. The stories were really engaging if they thought of. Again, you're starting with something true, and it gives you a launching point for your imagination. Words. Words themselves can be the starting point of a story. What I sometimes ask people to think about is, what words fascinate you and why? Just make a list. Make a list of 10, 15 words you like. What about that word? It could be the physical sound of the word, just the sound. You just like saying it. You like the palate that feels in your mouth. Or it could be the idea of that word, the concept that the word implies. Maybe that means something to you. Or you find that's a particularly beautiful word. You also like to use it to impress people. Come up with a list. And here's the thing. See if you can start a story that uses 2, 3, 4 of these words in the first paragraph or two. How do you do that? What story could you possibly tell that would use the word mustard with mellifluous, with diplomacy? How do you put those 3 different, one's an adjective, one's a noun, the last one's a noun. How do you put them into a particular story and have it make sense? Well, that's a creative challenge. And a creative challenge often leads to a creative result. And some of us need challenges. Some of us thrive on challenges. Some of us do better with the challenges, with those, I don't know, rules is the right word, the limitations, the guidelines presented than elsewhere. So just think about that. If you have an issue with coming up with a story or the direction of the story, what kind of creative challenges can you give yourself in that way? Let's see, other ones, hobbies. Okay, very important. Everyone's got a hobby. You know a subject better than lots of people in your life. It may not be related to the job you work, it may not be related to your degree, but you are good at something and you know about something that almost no one else around you does. It could be you can play an instrument. It could be you know a lot about cooking. It could be you know a lot about basketball. It could be you are really good with a camera. Maybe it's your job, maybe it's not. Well, it's a hobby, so it probably technically wouldn't be a job, but it's an expertise you have. Think about that. What do I know, and how can I put that into a story? Somehow make that a very crucial and important story, because you know what? The detail that you provide in the story will feel real to you, and you'll be confident as a writer. You gotta have confidence as a writer. And it will lead you further down the story. By pursuing what you know about your hobby will lead to characters, will lead to conflict, will lead to situations you can use for a story. Okay, here's another one. How about news items? Now, I know what you're thinking. God, the news. I try to avoid the news. Well, what odd particular things have you heard about on the news that just make you stop and think, what the world is the story behind that? Or it could be just, I hate to say it, something macabre, something tragic. What is the story behind that? Some very good, very good stories and novels have been written with their inspiration point being something that literally happened in the world of the writer while the writer was living, the writer knew about. That's not really what the story is or the novel is, it's the inspiration. So think about it. Next time you hear about a kind of curious or funny or even tragic event in the news, eventually think to yourself, what does that suggest to me for a possible story to write? Again, I'm not asking you to be a journalist. I'm not asking you to be a documentarian. Just think about what those events could suggest to your fiction writing imagination. How could you run with that? What kind of characters could you invent to fill out that story? There's a lot of material there, more than maybe naturally you might think. And another category that's a lot of fun, and I love to talk to people about, and that is the bizarre. What do I mean by bizarre? Everyone has bizarre things that happen to them. Everyone does. Weird stories of inexplicable, not only necessarily supernatural things, but just very odd events. Everyone encounters them. Weird coincidences, inexplicable events that you just kind of scratch your head and say, who knows what that was about, and you go on. Okay, when I was a kid, for instance, there were at least 2 times. I grew up in the woods of Southern Maryland, deep in the woods. It was in a community of people that sort of moved there deliberately to get away from the suburbs and the cities. And so I was alone a lot of time with just engulfing woods around me. And there were at least 2 times in my childhood. I heard someone talk to me and I turned around and there was no one there. And I had no idea what the heck was that about. And whenever I tell that story to people, I feel, that does happen. Well, I have no idea what that was about, but it seems like rich material to pursue fictionally, like someone to whom that happens. But there's lots of bizarre things. I went to a wonderful reading in Little Rock a few weeks ago where the writer was reading from a novel, the premise of which is a woman who has foresight. She knows what's going to happen in the future. And no one quite believes her, and she pretty much keeps it to herself, but it's true. I mean, it's literally true to the character. And it was very compelling reading how the writer developed this town and made it believable. So just think of that as useful information for storytelling. Whatever you think is bizarre, and whether you in your real life would believe it or not, it makes for great stories.